In 21 days, I was in Kailash, trekked. My muscle mass had gone down, my legs had become like this. Always I've been walking, trekking, playing games, but my muscle mass went down so much in these 8 weeks, I just shrank like that.
3 weeks ago, a 94-year-old Chinese monk broke 6 decades of silence, and what he revealed about Mount Kailash could change everything we thought we knew about the sacred mountain. According to ancient texts hidden beneath his monastery in Qinghai, Mount Kailash may not simply be a mountain. The texts allegedly describe it as an ancient machine, an enormous structure built for a purpose no human civilization could have understood. And the most disturbing claim is that the machine may still be active. The monks call it the anchor point, a place where time behaves differently, electronics mysteriously fail, and those who venture too close are said to experience terrifying physical changes. But if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear what is supposedly hidden beneath the mountain. Because the ancient texts describe something called the seed of the next world, something the mountain may have been built to protect. Before we uncover what these forbidden texts allegedly reveal, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this is a mystery you won't want to miss. And now, let's go back to the moment when the old monk finally broke his silence. After spending just 12 hours on the slopes of Kailash, a group of Siberian climbers reportedly returned looking as though 2 decades had passed over them. Their once dark hair was suddenly threaded with gray. Their beards appeared weeks longer than they could possibly have grown in that amount of time. Their fingernails had extended far beyond the fingertips, while deep wrinkles, sagging skin, and exhausted expressions covered their faces. They looked less like men returning from a climb and more like survivors of an experience that had somehow aged them from the inside out. Dr. Volkov recorded what he witnessed in a private journal, a document that reportedly remained unpublished until after his death. According to his notes, the climber's eyes disturbed him more than anything else. They were not simply afraid. They looked vacant, almost lifeless, as though they had encountered something that had taken away a piece of their identity. When Volkov questioned them about how long they had actually spent on the mountain, their answers made no sense. One climber insisted they had been there for weeks. Another was certain only a few hours had passed. As the questioning continued, their behavior became increasingly unstable. Some became agitated and even aggressive whenever Volkov pushed for more details. Before allowing the climbers to leave the region, Volkov ordered a full series of medical examinations. What those examinations supposedly revealed was even more disturbing. Their organs appeared to show deterioration normally associated with people in their 80s. Cellular damage that would ordinarily develop over decades had supposedly appeared within hours. Their blood work indicated an extraordinary level of biological stress, suggesting that their bodies had endured something comparable to years of physical strain in a single afternoon. Then came the most disturbing part. Within 2 years, every one of those climbers was reportedly dead. Heart failure, organ failure, severe medical conditions that would be extraordinarily unusual in otherwise healthy men in their 30s. The only factor they appeared to share was the same 12-hour exposure on the slopes of Mount Kailash. There is a real biological concept that makes this story particularly intriguing: accelerated telomere shortening. Telomeres are protective structures at the ends of chromosomes, and they naturally become shorter as we age. Severe physical and psychological stress can influence this process and contribute to biological aging. But the level of deterioration described in Volkov's supposed records would represent something far beyond what modern medical research has established. It would suggest that the normal timeline of human aging had somehow been compressed into a matter of hours. And according to the story, the monks were not surprised at all. They supposedly knew about it centuries before modern medicine existed. Master Chen claimed that ancient manuscripts describe a mysterious zone extending approximately 15 kilometers outward from the summit in every direction. Inside this invisible boundary, the texts allegedly say the normal rules of nature begin to behave differently. Time compresses, bodies deteriorate, and something watches, something that appears to be measuring exactly how much a person can endure before they finally break. But there is another detail that makes the story even more unsettling. For thousands of years, pilgrims have traveled around Mount Kailash in a sacred ritual circuit known as the Kora. Completing the journey is traditionally believed to remove negative karma. The full route stretches for roughly 52 kilometers and reaches elevations above 5,000 meters. Tibetan Buddhists, Hindus, Jains, and followers of the Bon tradition all make this pilgrimage. But according to the mysterious texts described by Master Chen, the Kora may have a meaning far different from what outsiders assume. The practice is supposedly described literally rather than symbolically. Walk the circuit, and time changes. Move closer to the summit, and the effect becomes stronger. The mountain does not merely make you older, according to the legend. It takes something from you that can never be recovered. Hours, years, perhaps even entire futures that were supposed to belong to you. And once it begins, there is no permission to ask for. Then we reach what may be the strangest mystery surrounding Kailash of all: the unclimbable summit. No human being has ever officially stood on the top of Mount Kailash. Not one documented ascent exists throughout recorded history. And it is not because nobody has ever considered trying. Kailash rises to approximately 6,638 meters. By Himalayan standards, that elevation alone does not make it an impossible mountain. Numerous peaks at comparable heights have been successfully climbed, some of them many times. Others have even become destinations for commercial mountaineering expeditions. Yet Kailash remains untouched. The Chinese government, which controls access to the Tibetan Autonomous Region where the mountain is located, has prohibited attempts to reach the summit since the 1980s. The official explanation is straightforward. The mountain is sacred, and climbing it would violate its religious significance. But the legends surrounding the mountain claim something more happened before those restrictions were imposed. There were failed attempts, and there were disturbing reports from people who got close. One of the earliest Western mountaineers associated with these accounts was British explorer Hugh Rutledge. In 1926, he reportedly spent 3 weeks examining Kailash from different approaches. Rutledge was no inexperienced traveler. He had faced some of the most dangerous conditions the Himalayas could offer. He would later lead the 1933 Everest expedition, an expedition that came closer to Everest's summit than any previous British attempt. In other words, he understood mountains. He understood danger, and he understood the difference between fear and genuine technical impossibility. Yet after 3 weeks studying Kailash, Rutledge reportedly packed up his equipment and described the mountain as effectively unclimbable. What makes the account so intriguing is what he supposedly identified as the greatest obstacle. It was not simply steep rock. It was not ice. It was not the altitude. Instead, he described an overwhelming sensation that intensified as he moved closer to the mountain, a pressure in his chest, a growing certainty that something about Kailash was aware of his presence, and that something did not want him there. Eventually, his guides refused to continue. 3 of them reportedly experienced nightmares so severe that they woke screaming and clawing at their own faces. For Rutledge, turning away from Kailash supposedly did not feel like surrendering to a difficult mountain. It felt like being permitted to leave. After spending 3 weeks studying Kailash from every direction, Rutledge finally made his decision. He packed away his equipment and described the mountain as completely unclimbable. But the reason he gave was unusual. His expedition records did not point primarily to dangerous ice, unstable rock, or impossible technical terrain. Instead, he described something far harder to explain. The closer he got to the mountain, the stronger a strange pressure became inside his chest. Along with it came an overwhelming feeling that Kailash was somehow aware of him, and that it did not want him there. Eventually, his guides refused to go any farther. 3 reportedly began suffering terrifying nightmares. They would wake screaming in the night, sometimes clawing at their own faces. Even Rutledge later described their departure in an unsettling way. It did not feel like they had simply chosen to retreat. It felt as though they had been allowed to leave. And the strange reports did not end there. Decades later, in 2001, a Spanish climbing expedition received something extremely unusual: official authorization from Chinese authorities to attempt a summit of Mount Kailash. These were not inexperienced adventurers. They were highly accomplished climbers, with experience on some of the most dangerous mountains on Earth, including Everest and K2. They had faced extreme altitude, technical rock, brutal weather, and conditions that would turn most people back. But Kailash stopped them before they even got beyond base camp. Members of the team reportedly began experiencing disturbing psychological symptoms. Some claimed to see visions of family members dying. Others imagined the ground splitting open beneath their feet. Several reported seeing strange shapes moving at the edge of their vision, only for those shapes to disappear whenever they turned toward them. Then came sudden waves of nausea. They could appear without warning and vanish just as quickly. But the most disturbing part was something several climbers reportedly experienced at the same time. They developed an intense and difficult-to-explain certainty that continuing toward the summit would lead to something far worse than death. It was not ordinary fear. It was the feeling that they absolutely had to stop. Russian climber Sergei Chistyakov later described a similar experience in an interview that, according to the story, was eventually suppressed by local authorities. During the interview, he reportedly appeared visibly shaken. He chain-smoked throughout the conversation and avoided looking directly into the camera. His translator claimed that Chistyakov had struggled to sleep normally for months afterward. Chistyakov acknowledged that altitude sickness was part of what he experienced, but he insisted there was something else. His heart would suddenly begin racing for no obvious reason. His body felt overwhelmed, yet one particular thought kept returning to his mind again and again. "You do not belong here." What disturbed him most was that he did not feel the thought was coming from himself. He believed it was coming from somewhere outside him, from the mountain. He described the sensation as though an invisible force were pressing directly against his mind, almost like a hand pushing down on his skull. Then something remarkable happened. The instant he made the decision to turn around, the symptoms disappeared. The racing heartbeat stopped. The overwhelming pressure faded. The fear lifted. Chistyakov later described the experience as being released from a grip he had never realized was holding him. The relief was so powerful that he reportedly broke down and cried. There is, of course, a psychological explanation worth considering. Under extreme altitude, exhaustion, oxygen deprivation, fear, and physical stress, hallucinations and altered perceptions can occur. Shared psychological experiences among people facing the same extreme environment are also documented. But the Kailash stories raise a different question. Why do similar descriptions appear across different cultures and languages? Reports attributed to climbers from Spain, Russia, Germany, Japan, and Himalayan communities contain strikingly similar elements despite being separated by geography, culture, and decades of time. That alleged cross-cultural consistency is what makes the legend so difficult to dismiss as nothing more than ordinary fear or altitude-related hallucination. and according to the ancient texts described by Master Chen, this phenomenon already had a name. The monks supposedly call it the field of rejection. They describe it not as an attack, but as a defensive system. According to the legend, the mountain somehow recognizes the psychological weaknesses of anyone who approaches and magnifies those weaknesses until turning back becomes the only possible choice. The monks do not interpret this force as evil. Quite the opposite. They believe it is protective. The mountain is not trying to destroy those who approach it. It is making sure they leave before discovering what lies beyond the boundary. And then there are the machine failures, the compass failures. Near Mount Kailash, compasses are said to behave in ways that should be impossible. That might sound like a minor inconvenience anywhere else, but in this environment it could become a matter of life and death. The landscape is enormous and repetitive. Ridges resemble one another. Familiar landmarks can disappear behind clouds. Weather can change within minutes. In a place like this, losing reliable navigation is not simply frustrating, it can be deadly. For decades, trekkers have claimed that strange compass failures occur around Mount Kailash. One of the more unusual stories allegedly comes from a German expedition in 2015. The team reportedly carried 6 compasses made by 3 different manufacturers. Then, within roughly 8 kilometers of the summit, all 6 supposedly stopped behaving normally at almost exactly the same time. According to the expedition leader, a former military navigator with more than 2 decades of experience, he watched the needles on all 6 devices begin spinning together. It looked as though every compass was reacting to the same invisible force. There are legitimate magnetic anomalies across parts of the Tibetan Plateau, and satellite observations have identified localized disturbances in the broader region. But supporters of the Kailash mystery argue that the reports surrounding the mountain appear unusually persistent and intense compared with other areas where magnetic irregularities have been recorded. Geologists can point to natural explanations, including rocks containing magnetite and other magnetic minerals. But the more mysterious accounts claim that the pattern of the disturbances around Kailash does not resemble the distribution normally associated with volcanic or mineral formations, and the stories become even stranger when you look upward. Pilots operating in the region have reportedly experienced unexplained instrument problems near the mountain. Aircraft are not permitted to fly directly over the summit, with the area treated as restricted airspace. Officially, the restrictions are connected to the mountain's location and religious significance. But according to the legend, there is another reason that has never been publicly acknowledged. Pilots who have flown near Kailash have described instruments behaving independently of one another. Altimeters allegedly displayed readings that made no sense. Heading indicators reportedly began moving in the wrong direction. Communication signals sometimes disappeared completely, only returning after the aircraft moved farther away. And then there is the turbulence. Instead of the gradual instability pilots normally expect when approaching disturbed air, some accounts describe violent shaking appearing almost instantly in otherwise clear conditions. Then, just as suddenly, everything became calm again. Modern aircraft contain multiple backup systems specifically designed to prevent a single malfunction from becoming a catastrophic failure. Yet the stories surrounding Kailash claim that several systems can malfunction at the same time. One commercial pilot, speaking anonymously, reportedly claimed that he had flown routes in the region dozens of times. According to him, every flight seemed to produce some strange technical problem that should not have happened. He and his co-pilot never talked about it. Neither did the other crews. But, according to his account, everyone knew something unusual was happening. Then drones entered the story. Documentary teams have attempted to send unmanned aircraft toward the slopes, hoping to obtain aerial footage of a summit that humans have never officially reached. Many of those attempts allegedly ended almost immediately. Some drones reportedly lost their signals and simply dropped from the sky. Others managed to return, but the footage they carried was allegedly corrupted or distorted, appearing as though the data had been disrupted by some unknown interference. When technicians examined the equipment afterward, they reportedly found something even more puzzling. There were no obvious signs of physical damage, no burned components, no broken mechanical parts, no clear explanation for why the systems had stopped working. According to these accounts, the drones simply became useless while they were within the mountain's supposed zone of influence, then began operating normally again after being moved away. When Master Chen was told about these incidents, he reportedly showed no surprise. Instead, he simply nodded. "The texts predicted this," he said. "The anchor point generates a field that rejects what is artificial. Your machines are not welcome there. Neither are you." But the monks supposedly believe there is more to these failures than simple interference. They claim the breakdowns are deliberate. According to their interpretation, the mountain does not randomly destroy technology. It targets the very tools humans depend on to maintain a sense of control. First, it takes away navigation, then communication, then the machines themselves. And by the time a climber realizes just how isolated and disoriented he has become, the psychological pressure has already begun. The instinct to turn around is no longer a choice. It is overwhelming. The Twin Lakes. At the foot of Mount Kailash, two enormous lakes lie side by side, divided by only a narrow stretch of land measuring around 3 kilometers. Yet, despite their proximity, they seem to belong to completely different worlds. The first is Lake Manasarovar. It is a freshwater lake known for an extraordinary stillness. Even when powerful winds sweep across the high Tibetan Plateau, its surface can appear remarkably smooth, almost like a giant mirror. Sitting at roughly 4,590 meters above sea level, Manasarovar displays a strange contrast with much of the surrounding region. During winter, when many nearby bodies of water become covered in ice, the lake can remain remarkably open and reflective. And then, almost beside it, is Rakshastal. Its waters are salty, turbulent, and constantly moving. The surface often appears restless, as though something beneath it is preventing the lake from ever becoming completely calm. Rakshastal is also notably different biologically. Fish are absent from its waters, while Manasarovar supports aquatic life. For travelers who visit both lakes within the same journey, the contrast can feel almost surreal. Two bodies of water separated by only a few kilometers, yet each seems to possess an entirely different character. Science does offer explanations for at least part of this mystery. The two lakes have different water sources, drainage systems, and chemical compositions. Manasarovar receives substantial meltwater from the glaciers and slopes around Kailash, while Rakshastal is influenced by different mineral and hydrological inputs. Those differences are real. But the mystery believers focus on something else. They ask why Manasarovar can remain so calm under conditions where the surrounding environment would normally be expected to create much stronger waves. When Master Chen began discussing the two lakes, his voice reportedly became quieter. He looked toward the other monks before continuing, almost as though he was deciding whether the next part should even be spoken aloud. Then he revealed what the manuscripts supposedly call them: the mountain's eyes. According to the ancient texts, Manasarovar watches the heavens, while Rakshastal watches what exists beneath the surface. Together, Chen claimed, they form a kind of ancient surveillance system that has been operating for thousands of years, Nothing comes near Kailash without being seen. Nothing. And after sunset, Manasarovar becomes even more mysterious. Across different centuries and cultures, witnesses have described tiny points of light moving across the lake at night. They insist these are not ordinary reflections of stars. Instead, the lights allegedly travel independently across the water, sometimes following patterns that appear deliberate. Then there are the changing colors. Accounts describe Manasarovar shifting between shades of blue and green, with occasional reports of reddish or crimson tones that supposedly have no straightforward geological explanation. The Indian poet and pilgrim Kabir is also associated with descriptions of strange lights over Manasarovar, portraying them as almost otherworldly messengers traveling between the heavens and the depths. What makes the stories more intriguing is the claimed similarity between accounts separated by centuries. Different observers, different cultures, hundreds of years apart, yet remarkably similar descriptions. And the strange reports do not stop at the water. Pilgrims traveling around the lakes have spoken of landscapes that seem difficult to map consistently. Trails allegedly disappear and then seem to reappear farther along the route. Rocks that were clearly visible at one moment are reportedly missing later. Even photographs have sometimes been claimed to show something different from what witnesses remember seeing with their own eyes. Then there is sound. Some visitors describe voices or noises seeming to arrive late, distorted, or strangely distant. Others describe an unusual quality to the silence itself, as though faint echoes remain suspended in the air long after the original sound has disappeared. The monks have their own explanation. They believe none of this is accidental. According to them, the lakes are not merely watching visitors, they are testing them. The theory is that the lakes distort perception and challenge anyone approaching Kailash, determining whether that person can be trusted with whatever lies beyond the mountain's outer defenses. And the most disturbing part? Most people supposedly never realize they are being tested at all. Then comes another mystery: the impossible geometry. Even from a distance, Mount Kailash appears unusually symmetrical. Most Himalayan peaks were shaped through immense geological forces, followed by millions of years of erosion, ice, and glacial movement. Their forms are generally irregular and asymmetrical.